Welcome to Mr. Kellen Stories. How are you doing today? Where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. In today's thrilling tale, we dive into an incredible love story that defies all odds. What happens when a billionaire's daughter falls for a humble pizza delivery boy? This heartwarming yet suspense-filled journey is full of unexpected twists, intense emotions, and a fight for love that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Will their love survive family pressures, societal judgment, and the weight of their differences? Watch now and get ready for a roller coaster of emotions. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more captivating stories. In a luxurious mansion in the heart of a bustling city lived Isabella, a young billionaire's daughter. The night was quiet, almost eerily so, inside the vast, opulent mansion where Isabella lived. The mansion, tucked away in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, stood as a symbol of wealth and power. Its marble floors gleamed under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. The rooms were filled with priceless art, exotic flowers, and elegant furnishings. Yet, despite the beauty of her surroundings, Isabella felt a hollow emptiness gnawing at her heart. The riches, the events, the constant stream of people, nothing could fill the deep void she had carried for years. Isabella, the daughter of a successful billionaire, had grown up surrounded by luxury, but there had always been a part of her that felt disconnected from it all. As a child, she'd been taught to expect nothing less than the best, but what she craved more than anything was something real, something genuine. In her world, people wore masks, pretending to be someone they weren't. She had attended countless gala events, charity dinners, and high society parties where all that mattered was appearance and status. But what Isabella yearned for, more than anything, was authenticity. She often found herself gazing out of the grand windows of her mansion, wishing to escape, to find something beyond the facade of wealth. On this particular night, after yet another lavish event filled with hollow conversations and obligatory handshakes, Isabella found herself more restless than ever. She had grown tired of the expected interactions, the people who only cared about what she could offer them. She felt suffocated by it all, and her mind wandered back to simpler times when she would sit by the fireplace with a good book or lose herself in the quiet of nature. But that evening, she didn't want to face the silence alone. So, on a whim, she picked up her phone and ordered a pizza. It seemed like a small act of rebellion against the life she had been born into, a life of excess and loneliness. A pizza was simple, comforting, a fleeting taste of normality. Meanwhile, across town, Jake was preparing to finish his shift. He was 22 years old, still young but already hardened by the reality of life. He had grown up in a modest, working-class family in a neighborhood where dreams seemed far out of reach. Jake had learned the value of hard work at an early age, watching his mother struggle to make ends meet while his father was out of the picture. Despite the hardships, Jake had always maintained a sense of optimism. He believed that if he worked hard enough, he could carve out a better life for himself. But delivering pizzas wasn't exactly what he had imagined when he thought about his future. He had big dreams, but for now, he was just trying to make it through each day. Tonight, like many others, Jake was finishing his last delivery of the evening. He had spent the past few hours weaving through the busy streets, navigating between late-night orders and busy intersections. The streets were dimly lit, with only the occasional car passing by. It was a job he didn't mind, but Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of his situation. He had grown up in a world that seemed so far removed from the wealth and privilege of the upper class. Sometimes he would deliver pizzas to mansions like Isabella's, and he would wonder what it would be like to live a life of ease without the constant struggle to pay the bills. Jake pulled into the long driveway of Isabella's mansion. the headlights of his car illuminating the large front steps. He could already see the grand entrance, the marble columns, and the towering windows that looked as though they belonged to a different world. He parked his car, grabbed the pizza, and made his way to the door, feeling a little out of place in his delivery uniform. He had delivered to mansions like this before, but every time he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in a world he would never belong to. As he rang the doorbell, he tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort. It was just another delivery, he told himself. The door swung open and Isabella stood before him. Her beauty took him by surprise. Her long, dark hair framed her face, and her eyes, warm and inviting, seemed to hold a depth he wasn't prepared for. She smiled as she greeted him, and in that moment, something unexpected stirred inside Jake. Isabella was different from the people he had met in her world. She wasn't cold or distant. Instead, she seemed real. He felt his nerves get the better of him, but he quickly masked them with a polite smile. "Hi, I have your pizza," he said, extending the box towards her. Isabella's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. She could tell he wasn't the typical delivery boy. There was something about him. Maybe it was his sincerity, the warmth in his eyes, or perhaps it was the fact that he seemed so out of place in a world filled with pretentiousness. Unlike the usual delivery drivers she encountered, Jake didn't seem to be just doing his job mechanically. There was a humbleness to him, something genuine that caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said, taking the pizza from his hands. "Would you like to stay for a moment? It's such a quiet night, and I could use some company." Jake blinked, taken aback by her invitation. Most of the time, customers wanted nothing more than to take their food and be left alone. But Isabella's eyes held an invitation he couldn't refuse. She wasn't like the others. There was no pretense in her smile. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was appropriate, but something told him this wasn't just a casual invitation. Something about her was different, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt drawn to stay. Sure," he said, his voice slightly hesitant. "I don't mind." Isabella stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. As Jake entered the grand foyer, he couldn't help but feel a wave of awe. The mansion was even more magnificent on the inside. Rich tapestries hung on the walls, and marble floors stretched out beneath their feet. Everything about it screamed wealth, but Jake had no time to admire the luxury. Instead, he followed Isabella into a cozy living room, where a fire crackled softly in the fireplace. The contrast between the lavish surroundings and the warmth of the room felt strangely comforting. They sat down on the plush sofa, and for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt at ease. She hadn't expected to connect with a delivery boy in such a personal way. Yet, here they were, two people from entirely different worlds, sharing a moment of quiet conversation. They spoke about everything and nothing, life, their dreams, the strange coincidences that had brought them together. As the conversation flowed, Isabella found herself laughing more than she had in months. Jake's humor was light and effortless, and he didn't treat her like the heiress she was. He simply saw her as a person, not as a symbol of wealth and status. For Jake, the evening was equally surprising. He had delivered pizzas to many wealthy homes, but he had never felt this comfortable. Isabella wasn't like the others. She wasn't trying to impress him, and she wasn't judging him for the job he did. It was a refreshing change from the usual encounters he had with people who saw him as nothing more than a delivery boy. As the evening drew to a close, Isabella stood up, her heart strangely full. She hadn't expected this encounter to leave such an impression on her. Jake had quickly become more than just a delivery boy. He had become someone she could talk to, someone who made her feel understood in a way she hadn't felt in years. She smiled warmly at him, her eyes reflecting the warmth she felt inside. "Thank you for staying," she said softly. I really needed this tonight." Jake gave her a shy smile, his heart pounding in his chest. "It was no problem," he replied. "I'm glad I could keep you company." As he left the mansion that night, something in him felt different. He didn't know what it was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter had somehow changed his life forever. And for Isabella, as she watched Jake walk back down the steps to his car, she felt a strange sense of connection, a pull that she couldn't quite explain. Little did either of them know that this was only the beginning of a story that would defy expectations and change both of their lives forever. As the days turned into weeks, something unexpected blossomed between Isabella and Jake. It began with the simple act of ordering pizza. Isabella had started to make it a habit, something about the routine of waiting for the delivery, the comfort of a warm pizza, and the anticipation of seeing Jake's friendly face began to soothe her restless soul. Each delivery felt like a small escape from her world of wealth and expectation. Jake, for his part, had come to look forward to these deliveries too. At first, it was just another job, a stop along his nightly route. But as he began to deliver the pizzas to Isabella's mansion more regularly, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement every time he pulled into the driveway. There was something calming about her presence. She wasn't like the others he had met. She didn't treat him with condescension or indifference. She genuinely listened to him, and it was this sincerity that drew him in. The first few times, their conversations were short, polite exchanges. "Here's your pizza, have a nice evening," and that was it. But slowly, things began to change. Isabella started to ask him questions about his life, his job, his dreams. At first, Jake was hesitant to open up. He had always kept his struggles and aspirations to himself, never feeling like anyone cared enough to listen. But Isabella wasn't like the others. She seemed genuinely interested, and over time, his answers grew more personal. One evening, Jake arrived at Isabella's mansion, holding a pizza box in one hand and a bag of wings in the other. As he handed her the food, she smiled and invited him inside, as she had done before. But this time, she didn't just sit back on the couch waiting for him to leave. She gestured for him to take a seat. "Stay for a while, Jake," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I've got a lot on my mind and I could use someone to talk to." Jake hesitated for a moment. He hadn't expected to be invited to stay, not tonight. But something inside him told him that, for once, he should take the invitation. He sat down across from Isabella and the conversation began. This time it wasn't just about pizza orders or small talk. They talked about their lives, real, deep things. Jake shared stories from his childhood, tales of his working-class upbringing, of his mother's sacrifices, and the struggles they faced just to put food on the table. He told her about the sleepless nights, the constant worry about paying bills, and the dreams he held tightly to in his heart. He admitted that more often than not, he felt trapped in the cycle of poverty, like he could never escape. It was the first time he had ever opened up so freely to anyone about the weight of his life. Isabella listened intently, her eyes never leaving him. She didn't interrupt or offer empty words of sympathy. Instead, she simply listened, something that most people in her life never did. As Jake spoke, Isabella could feel the rawness of his words, the deep sense of frustration and longing that lingered in them. She admired his strength and resilience, and more than that, she realized how much she had taken her own privileges for granted. After Jake had shared his story, he asked about Isabella's life. He had always seen her as the perfect heiress, someone who lived a life of privilege without the kind of challenges he had known. But when Isabella began to speak, he was surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. She told him of the suffocating pressure that came with being the daughter of a billionaire, of the expectations that everyone around her had for her to always be perfect. She spoke of the loneliness that came with wealth, how people often saw her as nothing more than a symbol of her father's success, rather than as an individual with her own hopes and dreams. "I'm not really part of this world," she confessed, looking away for a moment as if ashamed. "I don't belong in it, not really. People expect me to be happy, to be grateful for everything I have. But it doesn't feel like it's enough. I want to make a difference in the world, but sometimes it feels like I'm just caught in a cycle of meaningless events." Jake looked at her with newfound understanding. In that moment, he realized that despite the vast differences in their lives, they shared something deep and universal, a longing for something real, something that wasn't dictated by wealth, status, or societal expectations. He saw for the first time the person beneath the surface, the woman who wasn't defined by her father's money or her family's power. As the weeks passed, these conversations became more frequent. Isabella and Jake would talk for hours, each one more personal than the last. They discussed everything: love, life, and even their fears for the future. Isabella shared her dreams of creating a non-profit organization to help the less fortunate, of using her platform to raise awareness for social justice causes. Jake, in turn, confided in her about his aspirations to go back to school, to build a better life for himself, to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his family for generations. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had in common, despite the vast differences in their backgrounds. Isabella found herself laughing freely with Jake, something she hadn't done in years. His easy sense of humor, his kindness, and his ability to see the world without the filters of wealth and privilege made her feel like she could finally be herself. She didn't have to pretend to be someone else when she was with him. She didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations. For Jake, Isabella's presence was a breath of fresh air. She wasn't like the other people he had encountered in the wealthy circles. She wasn't concerned with appearances or superficial status. She saw him for who he truly was, and that made him feel valued in a way he had never felt before. He admired her intelligence, her drive to make a difference in the world, and the way she genuinely cared about the people around her. But their growing friendship wasn't without its challenges. Despite the connection they shared, they both knew that their worlds were vastly different. Isabella's life was filled with privilege, power, and expectation, while Jake's life was filled with struggle, hard work, and uncertainty. There were moments when doubt crept in. Would their friendship ever be more than just a fleeting connection? Could it survive the pressures of their respective worlds? But in those moments of doubt, when life felt heavy, they found solace in each other's company. They became each other's escape, a safe space where they could be themselves, without judgment, without expectations. In a world that constantly tried to define them, they found a refuge in one another, a place where they could simply be Jake and Isabella, two souls connected by something deep and unspoken. Their friendship had become something neither of them had expected. It was pure, honest, and real, something that transcended their circumstances and brought them closer together with each passing day. And in those quiet moments, as they shared their dreams and fears, they both began to realize that perhaps the connection they had found was the most real thing in their lives. As time went on, it became clear that this unlikely friendship was not just an escape from the worlds they came from. It was a lifeline. It was a chance to be understood, to be seen for who they truly were, without the trappings of wealth or struggle. In each other, they found not only comfort, but a sense of purpose. And while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. They had found something rare, a friendship that would change their lives forever. It was a chilly evening, the kind where the world outside seemed to slow down, and the only sound was the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. Inside the mansion, the air was warm, a comforting contrast to the crisp autumn air outside. Isabella had invited Jake over for dinner, something she had been planning for weeks. She wanted to show him how much she valued their friendship, how much his company had become something she cherished in a world that often felt overwhelmingly empty. She had no intention of making it anything more than a simple, heartfelt gesture. After all, they had become friends, a rare and precious connection. As Jake arrived, the usual feeling of nervousness that accompanied his deliveries was absent. There was no awkwardness, no sense of being out of place. He had been here before, but tonight felt different. The large, extravagant mansion felt a little less intimidating now, the luxury a little less suffocating. Isabella had opened the doors to her life, and over the past few weeks it had started to feel more like a place where he could be himself, not just a grand structure full of possessions and expectations. Isabella greeted him with a smile that seemed warmer than usual, and the moment their eyes met, Jake could feel the subtle shift in the air. There was something electric about the evening, a tension that neither of them had anticipated. She led him into the dining room, where an elegant spread awaited them. The candles flickered on the table, casting a soft glow on the room, and for the first time, Isabella felt a sense of peace. The thought that had been growing inside her over the past few weeks, something deeper than just friendship, now seemed undeniable. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something about Jake, the way he made her feel, stirred something in her heart. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. They laughed about old memories, shared stories of their childhoods, and reveled in the simplicity of each other's company. But there was an underlying current between them, something that neither of them could ignore. Isabella, who had grown used to the shallow conversations at the parties she attended, found herself captivated by Jake's honesty, by the rawness of his words, and by his ability to speak so freely about his hopes and fears. His words weren't polished, but they were real, and that authenticity was something Isabella longed for in the midst of her glamorous, yet often hollow world. She looked at Jake as he spoke, his voice carrying a sincerity that made her heart beat just a little faster. He was talking about his dreams, how he wanted to make something of himself, how he didn't want to stay stuck in the cycle of deliveries and struggles forever. He spoke of his aspirations to go back to school, to find a path that would lead him to something greater than the life he had known. Isabella could see the fire in his eyes, the passion that drove him. She admired his determination and resilience. It was a stark contrast to the world she had grown up in, a world that often felt like a gilded cage, where dreams were dictated by wealth and ambition was measured by social status. But as Jake continued, Isabella couldn't help but wonder if there was more than just admiration in her heart for him. The spark she had felt earlier wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was something deeper, something that caught her off guard. Could it be possible? Could she really be falling for him? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She had always been taught that love, true love, was supposed to be with someone of equal standing, someone who understood her world. But Jake didn't need to understand her world. He brought something to her life that no one else ever had. Genuine connection, an escape from the weight of her privilege, and a sense of freedom that made her heart feel light. The question lingered in her mind. Was this just a fleeting feeling or something more? Jake, on the other hand, was lost in his own thoughts, torn between the raw emotions he felt and the stark reality of their situation. He had always admired Isabella from afar, her beauty, her intelligence, and the way she carried herself with grace. But what attracted him even more was the way she made him feel seen. She didn't judge him for his job, his background, or his circumstances. She saw him as Jake, the person, not Jake, the delivery boy, and that was a gift he had never known before. But despite the undeniable chemistry between them, a deep sense of doubt gnawed at Jake's heart. He had been raised to understand the boundaries that society set, boundaries that separated people like him from people like Isabella. She was the daughter of a billionaire, a woman who had been surrounded by wealth and privilege her entire life. He, on the other hand, was just a delivery boy, barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. The gap between them felt insurmountable. Would someone like Isabella, with all her beauty and sophistication, ever see him as more than just a friend, more than someone from a different world? Could he ever be enough for her? As they continued to talk, the silence that fell between them was heavy. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap that had formed, this invisible wall of doubt and fear. Isabella could sense Jake's unease, the way his eyes darted away when she looked at him. She knew something was on his mind, something that he wasn't saying, but she couldn't force him to open up. She didn't want to push him away, but the tension in the air was palpable. Finally, after a long moment of silence, Jake put his fork down and looked at Isabella. His gaze was intense, his words heavy with emotion. "Isabella," he began, his voice quiet, I need to be honest with you. You've been such a great friend to me, and I don't want to mess that up, but I don't know if someone like me could ever be what you need. I'm just a pizza delivery boy. You deserve someone who can give you everything, someone who can offer you a life that matches your world. But me? I'm stuck. I don't know if I can give you what you deserve." The words hung in the air like a sharp weight, and Isabella felt a pang in her chest. Jake's insecurity was painfully clear. She understood his fears, but her heart ached at the thought that he might not see how much he truly meant to her. She reached across the table, her hand gently covering his. "Jake, listen to me," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I don't need someone who fits perfectly into the world I come from. What I need is someone who sees me for who I truly am. Someone who doesn't care about my father's wealth, my status, or the expectations that come with all of that. What I need is someone real. And you, Jake, you are more real than anyone I've ever met." Jake's eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless. The vulnerability in her voice, the sincerity in her eyes, left him breathless. Isabella wasn't just saying these words to make him feel better. She truly meant it. Isabella continued, her heart full of emotion. "Don't you see? You don't have to be anyone other than who you are. That's all I've ever wanted, to find someone who can be themselves with me, without pretenses, without fear. I've never felt this way about anyone, Jake. And it's not because of your job or your past or where you come from. It's because of who you are, the way you make me feel, the way you care. I don't care about the rest." In that moment, something shifted between them. The doubts that had plagued Jake's heart began to fade, replaced by the warmth of Isabella's words. It was as if a heavy curtain had been lifted, and for the first time he saw a glimmer of possibility, a future where he and Isabella could be something more than just an unlikely friendship. The night didn't end with grand declarations or sweeping gestures, but it ended with a quiet promise, a promise that, for the first time, they could face whatever came next together, no matter the obstacles. Their bond had deepened, and whatever the future held, they were ready to face it side by side. The evening air was crisp, the kind of chill that made people pull their coats tightly around themselves and breathe out in soft clouds of warmth. They had spent hours together inside, discussing everything from their dreams to their deepest fears, their laughter mingling with the crackling sounds of the fireplace. The conversations had flowed effortlessly, like they had known each other for years, and yet they both understood that what was happening between them was something deeper, something that had slowly been building without either of them fully realizing it. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery light on the world outside as they made their way to the garden of Isabella's mansion. It was a peaceful night, The sounds of the city far off in the distance, and the only noise around them was the rustling of the leaves in the trees. They continued their conversation about the future, about where their lives might go. But this time, there was a change in the air, a tension that neither of them could ignore. Isabella felt it first. She had never been one to believe in those sudden moments where everything seems to stop. But tonight, everything felt suspended in time. It was like the world around them had fallen away, and there was only Jake standing there beside her, looking at her with the same intensity that had been building between them for weeks. She stopped walking, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. She didn't know what it was, this unspoken pull between them, but it was undeniable. She could feel her breath quicken, and her mind raced with questions and confusion. Was this real? Was this the moment where everything would change? But before she could process the thoughts swirling in her mind, she saw it. The way Jake was looking at her, his expression a mixture of wonder and hesitation, as if he, too, was trying to understand what was happening. Without a word, Isabella took a step closer, her body moving almost of its own accord. There was no grand declaration, no lingering uncertainty. There was only the moment, this fragile, perfect moment, where everything felt right. She reached out, her hand gently cupping his face, and without thinking she leaned in. Jake's eyes fluttered shut, just as their lips met, and the world around them seemed to fade into a quiet blur. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, as if they were both testing the waters, unsure of what they were feeling, but unable to stop themselves. It was a kiss filled with uncertainty, but also a promise of something more, something neither of them had expected, but both deeply desired. As their lips pressed together, the tenderness in the kiss deepened, each touch of their mouths conveying everything they had been unable to say in words. It was as if the barriers that had once separated them, the walls built by their worlds, their differences, their doubts, had finally crumbled. In that kiss, they weren't a billionaire's daughter and a pizza delivery boy. They were just two people, drawn together by something real, something that had been building for so long. Jake's hand found its way to the small of her back, pulling her closer, his fingers trembling with the same rush of emotions that had surged through him for weeks. He had never felt anything like this before, this connection, this overwhelming desire, mixed with a deep sense of fear. Fear of what their kiss meant, of what it could cost them. But in that moment, none of those thoughts seemed to matter. Isabella, too, felt a flood of emotions crash through her. Excitement, joy, fear, and an undeniable warmth. She had never imagined that this moment would come like this. She had always believed that she would fall in love in some grand, destined way, but this was different. It wasn't about the lavish gestures or the perfect timing. It was about the raw, vulnerable connection they shared, the quiet understanding that neither of them had ever experienced before. As they pulled away, both of them were left breathless, hearts racing in the stillness of the garden. The world seemed to have paused in that instant, and for a moment neither of them knew what to say. Their eyes met, and the silence between them spoke volumes. They didn't need words. The kiss had said it all. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to gather her thoughts. The emotions flooding through her were overwhelming. She had never expected this to happen, not with Jake, not like this. Her mind raced with questions. Was this really love? Or was it just a moment of weakness? Could she truly build something with someone like him, someone from such a different world? The weight of her thoughts made her feel dizzy, and she looked away, her gaze searching for anything to ground her. But Jake wasn't saying anything either. He was just standing there, looking at her with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, as if he too wasn't sure what had just happened. His heart was still racing, and the doubts that had always held him back were starting to creep in. He had never imagined that his life would lead him here, standing in the garden of a billionaire's mansion, kissing the woman who seemed to have everything, someone so far out of his league. But despite the confusion and the fear, there was also something undeniable between them, a connection that neither of them could ignore. It was a connection that was more than just physical, it was deeper, something that had been growing over time. And in that moment, as their eyes locked, neither of them could deny it any longer. The next morning, Isabella woke up with a fluttering in her chest, an excitement she hadn't felt in years. The kiss had been everything and more. But along with the excitement came confusion. She had always been told what her life was supposed to look like, who she should date, what was expected of her as the daughter of a billionaire. But now, everything felt different. She couldn't stop thinking about Jake, about the way he made her feel, the way he had seen her for who she truly was. But as much as she longed to embrace what had happened, she couldn't ignore the reality of the world they lived in. Their love, if that's what it was, would not be accepted easily. People would judge her for being with someone like Jake. They would call it a foolish mistake, something that couldn't possibly last. And worse, her father, who had always held strict expectations for her, would never approve of this. Isabella sat up in bed, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. Could she really be with Jake, someone from such a different life, when everything around her would fight against it? Could their love survive the judgment of her family, the harsh realities of their social status, and the expectations that the world placed on her? The question lingered in the air, unresolved, as she got ready for the day. But one thing was certain: she couldn't erase the way she felt about him. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella realized that maybe it was time to stop living for the world's expectations and start living for herself. And that journey, she knew, would not be easy. But she was ready to take it, one step at a time. The early days of their relationship were filled with a quiet, stolen joy. Isabella and Jake spent countless hours together, talking, laughing, and discovering the depths of each other's souls. It was a love that had grown organically, unforced and pure. But as much as they wanted to believe their love was all they needed, reality soon reared its ugly head. Isabella could feel the tension mounting, the looks from her friends, the raised eyebrows, the whispered conversations. Each one was a reminder that her love for Jake wasn't just unconventional, it was unacceptable to the world she had been born into. Her father, the powerful businessman who had built his empire from the ground up, had always preached the importance of image, reputation, and maintaining certain standards. The rules had been clear. She was expected to marry someone who fit her world, someone who could complement the life of wealth and success she had inherited. The first time her father learned of Jake, he dismissed it as a joke. "A delivery boy?" he had scoffed, laughing it off as if it was some passing phase. But when Isabella stood her ground, when she refused to back down, her father's anger flared. "Isabella, what are you thinking?" His voice was cold, his words sharp as knives. This is a mistake. Do you realize what you're doing? You are the daughter of a billionaire, and yet you're throwing that all away for someone from the streets. You could have anyone, and you choose him." His eyes were filled with disbelief, disappointment seeping through every word. Isabella had never seen her father so upset, and it tore at her heart to know that her happiness was so foreign to him. She had always been Daddy's little girl, the perfect daughter who followed every expectation without question. But now, standing before him, she felt something deep inside her shift. She wasn't the same person anymore. She had found something real, something genuine, and she couldn't let him take that away. "I'm not throwing anything away, Dad," Isabella said, her voice calm but firm, though her heart was racing. "Jake is kind, intelligent, and he sees me for who I am. He makes me happy, and I need you to understand that." Her father's face hardened, and there was a flicker of anger in his eyes. "This is not how we do things in this family," he said, his tone icy. "I won't stand by and let you ruin your future over a passing whim. You're making a mistake, and I won't support it." Isabella's chest tightened. She had always admired her father, looked up to him as the figure who had made it all happen. But now, the very man who had taught her to value success was asking her to ignore the most important thing in her life, love. Jake, too, felt the weight of judgment. He knew from the beginning that people would talk, but he hadn't realized just how harsh and unforgiving the world could be. The whispers and stares were constant. Everywhere he went, there were murmurs of disbelief, judgment, and ridicule. The notion that someone like him, a simple pizza delivery boy, could be worthy of someone like Isabella was laughable to many. Jake had grown up with the harsh realities of life. He knew what it was like to struggle, to work hard for every penny. He understood that the world was built on social hierarchies, on the unspoken rules that kept the rich and the poor divided. He had always accepted his place, never dreaming of anything beyond his current reality. But now, with Isabella in his life, everything had changed. His dreams had expanded, and so had his fears. Could they really make this work? Could he prove to her family, to the world, that their love was real? The first time Jake encountered some of Isabella's friends, he knew it wasn't going to be easy. It was a casual gathering at one of her upscale friends' parties, and as soon as Jake walked in, he could feel the judgment in the air. The way they looked at him, the way they murmured among themselves, it was clear he didn't belong. The conversations abruptly stopped as he walked into the room, and the cold stares made his skin crawl. He had tried to act normal, to fit in, but the tension was palpable. "Is this the guy?" one of Isabella's friends asked with a smirk, her voice dripping with condescension. Jake's stomach twisted. He tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Yes," Isabella replied, stepping forward and standing beside him. She took his hand in hers, a silent declaration that she wasn't ashamed. "This is Jake." There was a long, uncomfortable silence before someone else piped up. "What does he do?" they asked, their tone laced with skepticism. "Pizza delivery, huh? How quaint." Jake tried to ignore the sting in their words, but it wasn't easy. He had never felt so out of place in his life. He could see the judgment in their eyes that had never known the struggle he faced every day. Their lives were filled with privilege, with ease. They didn't understand what it was like to fight for every opportunity, to live paycheck to paycheck, and yet they still felt entitled to belittle him. Isabella, sensing the discomfort in the air, took a deep breath. She squeezed Jake's hand tightly, a silent reassurance that she was there with him, that she wasn't going to let anyone make him feel inferior. "I don't care about what you think," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "Jake means something to me. I love him for who he is, not for what he does or how much money he has." The room fell silent. It was rare for Isabella to speak so boldly, and the room felt as though it was holding its breath. But in that moment, she didn't care. She wasn't going to let anyone dictate her happiness. She had made her choice, and it was Jake. As the evening wore on, Isabella could feel the whispers growing louder, the judgment seeping into every conversation. It was hard to ignore, but she refused to let it break her resolve. She loved Jake. She believed in him, and no matter what the world said, she would stand by him. For Jake, it was harder. He couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong in this world that seemed so foreign to him. He was proud of who he was, but he couldn't help but feel small in comparison to the wealth and power that surrounded Isabella. The judgment weighed heavily on him, and there were moments when he felt like running away from the whispers, away from the expectations. But then he would look at Isabella, and the fear would melt away. She was his anchor, his reason to fight, to prove that their love wasn't some fleeting moment. It was real, and it was worth fighting for. The world would always judge them. People would always whisper and stare. But as long as they had each other, Jake believed they could face anything. Together, they would prove that love wasn't about status or wealth. It was about trust, respect, and the courage to defy the limitations society placed on them. Isabella, too, knew that their love would never be easy. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She knew that love wasn't defined by the labels the world placed on them. Their connection was real, and that was all that mattered. The invitation to the charity event had come as a surprise to Jake. It wasn't the kind of place he had ever imagined himself being, and yet there he was, standing outside the grand mansion of Isabella's family, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. The event was an annual affair, one of the most prestigious in the city, where the rich and powerful gathered to show off their wealth and influence. It was a world Jake had only ever heard about in passing, never believing he would have any reason to step foot into it. Isabella had insisted, though. "You belong with me," she had said softly, her voice filled with a quiet but unwavering confidence. "I want you by my side tonight. It's important to me." Jake had hesitated. What could he offer in a world so far removed from his own? He had always been comfortable in his life as a delivery boy, driving around town, delivering food, trying to make ends meet. The idea of attending an event where the world's elite would judge him felt like stepping into a lion's den. But Isabella's belief in him was something he couldn't ignore. She saw him differently. She saw the real him, not the label society had placed on him. He took a deep breath, standing tall and reminding himself that he was worthy of this moment. He may not have had the same wealth or power as the people who would be there, but he had something more valuable, a love that transcended those things. With that thought in his mind, he walked into the mansion, his heart racing. As soon as he stepped inside, the atmosphere hit him like a tidal wave. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the air was thick with the clink of fine wineglasses and the hum of high society chatter. The room was filled with elegantly dressed men and women, each one more polished and perfect than the next. It was a world that felt entirely foreign to Jake, a world where he didn't belong. He could feel eyes on him as he made his way through the crowd. There were whispers, the kind of whispers that told him exactly what they thought of him. "Who's that?" he heard a voice murmur from behind him. "Is he one of the staff?" Jake tried to ignore it, but the sting of judgment was hard to push aside. He wasn't just an outsider in their world, he was an anomaly. He had no business being here, he was just a delivery boy, and everyone seemed to make sure he knew it. He clenched his jaw, his chest tightening as the whispers continued. His hands were slick with sweat, and he could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. He had never felt so small, so out of place. He tried to keep his head high, but every step he took felt heavier, as if the weight of the room was pressing down on him. Every time he looked around, he saw the curious, judgmental glances directed his way. He had never been treated like this before, not like a person, but like something to be scrutinized and judged. As he made his way deeper into the crowd, Isabella appeared at his side. She had been talking to a group of people, but immediately noticed the discomfort in his eyes. Without a second thought, she stepped forward and took his hand in hers, her grip firm and warm. Her presence, her touch, was like a shield against the coldness of the world around them. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. She was the only one in this world who made him feel like he mattered. Her eyes were filled with warmth and understanding, as if she could read the storm brewing inside him. He hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice low and hesitant. I don't belong here, Isabella. I don't know how to do this. I'm just me. Isabella smiled gently, her fingers tightening around his hand. And that's more than enough, she whispered, her gaze unwavering. You're here because you belong with me, not because of what anyone else thinks. You are more than just a delivery boy. You are everything to me. Her words, simple and sincere, struck a chord deep within Jake. The pressure of the situation didn't disappear, but the weight of his insecurities began to lessen. He looked at her, and in that moment he understood. It didn't matter what anyone else thought. What mattered was that Isabella believed in him. She saw something in him that no one else could see, and she didn't care about the labels or judgments. She had chosen him, and that was all that mattered. The couple continued to walk through the room hand in hand, and though the stares still came, they were no longer as sharp. Jake kept his gaze forward, refusing to let the whispers break him. He stood taller with each step, his confidence growing with every moment. Isabella's presence beside him gave him strength he hadn't known he had. They eventually found their way to a quieter corner of the room, and Isabella led him to a small table. I don't care what they say, she told him, her voice strong and steady. They can whisper all they want, but you and I know the truth. We know who we are. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone else. He was here because Isabella had invited him into her world, not to change who he was, but to share something real. In her eyes, he was enough. He was worthy of love, worthy of respect, and he wouldn't let anyone make him feel otherwise. As the night went on, Jake slowly began to relax. The cold stares still lingered, but they didn't carry the same weight. He was no longer trying to fit into a world that didn't understand him. Instead, he was learning to stand in the truth of who he was, alongside the woman who had shown him that love was more powerful than societal expectations. Isabella, too, felt a surge of pride. She could see the way Jake was changing, his courage growing with every passing moment. He wasn't the man who had walked into the mansion earlier, nervous and unsure. He was a man who had found his strength, who had realized that his worth didn't come from anyone's approval but his own. And as she stood beside him, hand in hand, she knew that they were facing this challenge together. The night may have been filled with judgment and whispers, but for Isabella and Jake, it was a victory. It was a test of courage, of standing firm in the face of adversity, and they had passed with flying colors. And as they left the event together, they both knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they would always have each other. Their love, their bond, was stronger than anything the world could throw their way. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The night had been perfect, an intimate evening for Jake and Isabella, filled with laughter and the quiet comfort that came from simply being together. They had made it through the judgment, the whispers and the harsh stares, and yet the storm that had been building behind the scenes was about to break. Isabella had never expected that her father, the man who had raised her, the man she had admired and loved, would be the one to test their love in the most devastating way. It was one evening when Jake received the call. The tone in Isabella's voice had been calm, but there was something underneath, something she couldn't hide. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. She knew what was coming. Jake met Isabella at her mansion, his heart heavy with a growing sense of dread. He had felt the change, the tension that had settled between them recently, but he had no idea how much deeper it went. Isabella was sitting in the grand living room when Jake arrived. Her eyes were red as though she had been crying. He could see it in her face, the pain, the uncertainty. It was a look he had never seen before, and it cut him to the core. "Isabella," Jake's voice was filled with concern as he rushed to her side, kneeling before her. "What's wrong? What happened?" She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. "My father. He found out about us, Jake." She paused, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. He's furious." Jake's heart dropped. He had known that Isabella's father wouldn't approve of their relationship, but he hadn't expected it to escalate like this. "What did he say?" Isabella's lips trembled as she spoke, struggling to find the words. "He said I was making a fool of myself, that this relationship was beneath me. He's trying everything to separate us, Jake. He doesn't care about our love. He only cares about his image, his power, and what people think of him." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He couldn't believe it. The man who had raised Isabella, who had guided her, could be so cruel, so willing to tear apart their love for the sake of his reputation. Jake had always known that society would judge him for his background, but he never imagined Isabella's father would try to destroy what they had. "But that's not all," Isabella continued, her voice barely a whisper. "He made an offer to you, Jake." Jake frowned, not understanding. "What kind of offer?" Isabella met his gaze, her eyes filled with sorrow. "He offered you money, a lot of money, to walk away from me, to sever all ties with me. He said it would all go away if you left me." Jake's heart shattered at her words. Money, that's all he had been to her father, a number, a pawn in his grand scheme. He had never been seen as someone worthy of Isabella, but hearing it from her father felt like a dagger to his soul. The thought that someone could try to buy their love, to erase their connection with the weight of cash, made him feel smaller than ever before. "I refused," Jake said, his voice firm, despite the crack in his heart. "I would never do that, Isabella. I love you. No amount of money can change that." Isabella nodded, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "I know. I told him I would never force you to make that choice. But that's not where the betrayal ends." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with dread. "What do you mean?" Isabella swallowed hard, her eyes welling with tears. "He's been spreading rumors about you. He's been telling people that you're only with me for my money, that you're trying to manipulate me. He's trying to ruin your reputation, Jake. He wants to destroy everything we've built." Jake stood up, his chest tight with pain and disbelief. He couldn't comprehend what he was hearing. Isabella's father had not only tried to bribe him, but he was actively working behind their backs to tear them apart. The man who should have been supporting their love, who should have been a father figure, was the one causing the most pain. He paced back and forth, trying to collect his thoughts. The betrayal was overwhelming. "I don't understand. Why is he doing this? Doesn't he see that I love you for you? Not for your money or your family's name? Why would he go to such lengths to destroy us?" Isabella wiped away a tear, her voice barely audible. "He doesn't care about love, Jake. To him, everything is about status. He sees me as a business deal, a way to maintain his wealth and influence. He can't fathom that I would choose someone like you, someone who doesn't fit his vision of the perfect match." Jake's fists clenched at his sides, frustration and anger bubbling inside him. He had always known that love could be difficult, that the world wasn't kind to people like him, but this was a betrayal he never expected. This was personal, and it felt like the ground beneath him had been ripped away. For the next few days, Jake became consumed with the rumors swirling around him. People he had known, people who had once respected him, now looked at him with suspicion and doubt. The whispers of his supposed motives grew louder, and it felt as though the walls were closing in on him. Everywhere he went, he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. Isabella, too, struggled. She had always been close to her father, but now she found herself standing at the crossroads of her loyalty to her family and her love for Jake. She didn't know how to fix this. She couldn't fight her father's influence alone, and yet she couldn't walk away from Jake. Not after everything they had been through. Their love had been tested by the world, by society, but this was different. This was a betrayal at the hands of the one person who should have been supporting them. Jake began to question everything. Could their love survive this? Could they truly build a future together when the world was so determined to tear them apart? But even in the midst of the heartbreak and uncertainty, there was something that neither of them could ignore. The love they shared, the deep bond that had grown between them, was not something that could be destroyed by money, rumors, or even betrayal. It was real, and it was worth fighting for. As Jake stood in the empty streets, staring at the life he had known slipping away, he realized that the only thing that mattered was Isabella and the love they had built together. The world might not understand them, and her father might try to destroy them, but their love was stronger than any obstacle, and he would not walk away, not now, not ever. The days following the betrayal were some of the hardest in Isabella's life. Each moment felt like a battle between her heart and her upbringing, between the man she loved and the world she had known since she was a child. The walls of her mansion, once a symbol of security and wealth, now felt like cold, suffocating prison bars. The whispers, the expectations, and the pressure of being the perfect daughter weighed heavily on her every step. She had never imagined a life outside the safety of her father's empire, nor had she imagined that the love she had found in Jake would be tested in such a painful way. Every decision she had made up until this point had been guided by the need to meet her father's approval, to live up to the image of the perfect daughter, the perfect heiress. Years had passed since Isabella and Jake had taken the bold step of choosing each other against all odds. Now, as they stood hand in hand, looking out over the quiet backyard of their home, the soft laughter of their children playing echoed in the air. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the scene, and for a moment everything felt perfect. Isabella and Jake had come so far from the days when their love was a secret, hidden away from the world. What had once been a love that defied every expectation had now become the foundation of a family, a legacy, and a movement. Their relationship had ignited a fire in countless hearts. People who had once felt invisible or unworthy, people who had dreamed of a world where love didn't have boundaries. And now, standing together as a family, they knew that they had created that world, at least in their own small corner of it. The children, their two beautiful kids, ran around the yard, their laughter a sweet reminder of the life Isabella and Jake had built together. The little girl, with her curly brown hair and bright eyes, ran toward them, her face lighting up with joy. "Mom! Dad, look at me!" she shouted, spinning in circles. Jake bent down, opening his arms wide to catch her. "You're spinning faster than a tornado, little one," he laughed, lifting her high into the air. The sound of their children's laughter, their innocence and joy, filled the air, and Isabella couldn't help but smile, her heart swelling with love. She turned to Jake, who was watching their kids with a look of quiet happiness on his face. There was a moment of silence between them, one of those moments where words weren't necessary, where they both understood what the other was feeling. The life they had created together was everything they had ever dreamed of. It hadn't been easy. The journey had been filled with challenges, both external and internal, but with every obstacle they had faced, their love had only grown stronger. They had fought against the world, against the prejudices and expectations that sought to tear them apart, and they had come out on the other side, stronger than ever. Isabella leaned against Jake, resting her head on his shoulder. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Jake's arm wrapped around her, pulling her close. "We have, and we've made something even more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. Not just the life we've built, but the difference we've made for others. the way we've shown people that love is more powerful than anything else in this world. Their story had become more than just a love story. It had become a call to action, a reminder to everyone that no matter their background, they deserved a chance at happiness, love, and equality. Through their platform, Isabella and Jake had continued their mission to break down the walls that divided society. They had worked to change the narrative, to challenge the stereotypes and prejudices that had long been ingrained in the world. They had used their success to give back, to create opportunities for others who had been silenced by the weight of their circumstances. They had also built a foundation that helped provide education, healthcare, and support to underprivileged communities. They had funded programs that offered scholarships to kids from working-class families who dreamed of a better future, just as Jake had once dreamed. Every step of the way, they had fought for equality, never backing down from the cause they believed in. Isabella's foundation had expanded, reaching countries all over the world. She had used her voice, once confined to the high society events and charity galas, to speak up for those who had been forgotten, for those who had been silenced. She and Jake had become advocates for change, using their story as proof that love, compassion, and a belief in a better future could break through the hardest barriers. But despite all the external successes, the awards, and the recognition, the most important thing to them remained simple: the love they shared, the family they had created, and the knowledge that they had made a difference in the lives of so many others. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a soft glow over their home, Isabella and Jake stood together, watching their children. They didn't need the wealth or the status to feel fulfilled anymore. What they had was something far more precious. A love that had defied the odds, a family that was bound together by that love, and a world that was just a little bit better because they had chosen to stand up for what they believed in. Isabella's voice broke the silence again, soft and full of warmth. "Jake," she said, turning to face him, "I'm so grateful for everything. For you, for us, for the life we've built. We've made it. And we've shown the world that love is the most powerful force there is." Jake smiled, his eyes filled with pride and tenderness. "We've made it because we've had each other. We've had the strength to stand together, no matter what the world tried to throw at us. And we've shown our kids and everyone else that love always wins." And with that, they turned back to watch their children, their hearts full of peace, knowing that the greatest legacy they could leave behind wasn't the wealth they had accumulated or the accolades they had received. It was the love they had shared and the lesson they had taught, that love, no matter its shape or form, transcends all things. It knows no barriers, no prejudices, and no limitations. As the night embraced them and the stars began to twinkle above, Isabella and Jake knew they had built a life full of love, equality, and the unwavering belief that anyone, no matter their background, deserved a chance at happiness. Their love story had become a shining example of hope, proof that when you choose love over everything else, you create a life more beautiful than anything money could buy. And that, they knew, was the most heartwarming ending of all.